Well, hey everybody, welcome to the Renaissance Woodworker Shop Update for November 4th, 2016. This week, well, I glued up a panel. After all that work making panel clamps, and hopefully you guys got a chance to see the video I released on the making of those panel clamps last week, I glued up a panel, and this was the exact type of panel we were talking about. It's got 3 boards in it, and you know that center board can just tend to slide around on you like crazy. Panel clamps worked like a charm. Took it out of the clamps. It is perfectly flush across my glue joints. I've just got a little bit of cleanup to do with the glue. Then I'll be ready to saw it to its final dimension and start work on the breadboards for the blanket chest. And speaking of breadboards, I got a question this week that I want to address. Mike wrote in and asked me how I go about sawing a really narrow board. And I happen to have a narrow board in this breadboard here. And his follow-up question was, do you saw it or do you just plane it away? And it's a great question, Mike. And I always ask myself, what would I do with the offcut? That's the first thing you need to think about, is the speed of sawing it or planing it. It's kind of a wash. If you do the sawing, you still got to plane it later. If you choose the right plane, you can plane away a ½ inch really, really quickly. So you have to ask yourself, what do I do with the offcut? That's really the determining factor. Both of these breadboards they're about a ½ inch too wide. I've already put a knife line on here all the way around the parts, and I need to get rid of this. So I'll look at this and go, can I do anything with this strip? Is there anything I need it for? Frankly, not really. So what I would do is just plane it away. And I've got a little edge planing tool here to do that. And choosing the right plane makes it go really, really fast. And that's where the scrub plane is really beneficial. The 4-plane and the scrub plane I often use interchangeably. Oftentimes you'll hear me say 4/scrub. When you're thicknessing a board and quickly removing material, either one will work. The 4-plane has much more mass. It's great for heavy milling work. The scrub plane is good for smaller boards, but it's also outstanding for taking down an edge like this. The shorter sole allows you to get into those hills and valleys and just hog off material and not have to worry about it necessarily getting perfectly flat at this point. I'm working to a line, so I don't really need to worry about flat, I need to worry about the line. So I've got my scrub plane set up here. I also find that it's easiest to adjust with a mallet. This is the Veritas model, so there is no adjuster wheel or anything like that. You have to be aware of the camber and the iron. So if you just focus on one edge, you'll find that it will start to really take down that edge, and you've got to shift your cut back. There we go. You see I'm working to lines here, so I have to constantly check my board and see how I'm doing. I'm going to stay just a hair away from my line. And then I'll come back and flatten that out. I'll just use the joiner plane because, well, it's here. Now I'm flattening, and you can hear where it will skip over sections in the middle. I could do this all day, or I could take a decent shaving. There we go. All right, that should do it. Just a tiny bit away from my line. Back my plane out a little bit. And that's got it. So now I'm at my final width, right at my line, and I'm good to go. And my byproduct is all of this stuff. Can't obviously do anything with that except maybe start fires. So what if you decided, you know what, I really do have a use for this strip. I want to save it. Well, then you can saw it out. But this narrow saw cut, it's not really something I want to do on a saw bench. I would much rather set it up on the edge of my workbench, hold it with a couple of holdfasts, and saw it off. You could use a panel saw for this. This board is about 7/8 of an inch thick, so I'm not going to go to a fine panel saw. I'll just use a regular hand saw, but this is actually a little bit finer tooth hand saw than my rough, heavy removal 5 points per inch guy. This guy is 8 points per inch. And I do this upright sawing technique. And I've got my saw curve set almost right on the edge of the bench. Not right up against it because I don't want to saw onto my bench. But the front edge of the bench acts as a great reference surface to keep things square. And I can also step back and sight down the blade, and I can see that it's plumb. I can also track my line along the face. As I get right to the end, be a little bit more delicate so I don't just snap it off. And that sawing is now taking me to where I was after I removed the scrub plane. Although I've got a much more even surface than I did with the scrub plane, so I ought to be able to plane this out very easily with my joiner. Almost to my line. A little fat right down here. Now, that board is done. So you can see it's two different ways to get to the same product using two entirely different sets of tools, but both pretty easy to accomplish in about the same amount of time. When you factor in all the planing to get to where we are now, a perfectly smooth and flat surface, it's about the same. So it all ends up being a wash, and it just depends on whether or not you have a need for this scrap. So that's all for me this week, folks. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you next week.